Hello to all of you. This is our story this afternoon. It comes from the Tuamotu archipelago. It happened about 400 years ago. And the Tuamotus, these are islands, they're atoll islands that east of Tahiti. And what you've got is you've got these coral, an atoll consists of a coral reef with a central lagoon. And on the coral reef, at different places, there are sandbars. And then you got vegetation growing there. And it's not mountainous. And this story happened about 400 years ago. And there's three parts to the story. There's the prequel, there's the main story, and then there's the sequel. And this is an important story for me. The reason I'm telling this story is several months ago, I dreamt that I went to the island of Takaroa in the Tuamotus, the western part of the Tuamotus. And I landed in an airplane. I was at the airport and I was thinking, hey, great. I can go tell the people this story so that they know about these battles that were happening on their island, like 400 years ago. And before I told them the story, I called out the names of the people in the story. And of course, these guys have been dead for hundreds of years and nobody responded. And I was sad. And how I did is I kneeled down on the ground and I wept that these people were gone. And that's the story. That's the reason, that's the dream that I had. And that's the reason why I'm telling the story. And when we tell stories, a lot of times what we need to do is we're trying to gain knowledge and wisdom from the examples of the people in the story. If they made good choices, we can learn from their good examples. If they made mistakes, we can learn from those too. In either case, we'll improve our lives. And when we go into the next world and we meet those people there, we can thank them for the things that we learned from them. And then we're going to share a kinship with them. We'll have a connection with them. And so this is the first part. This is the first in the series, the prequel. A long, long time ago, there was Takeru. He's the husband, and his wife Matariki. They lived in Te Rangi Kapu Kapuatea, the domed sky of Atea. And what Takeru is, it's a constellation of stars we call Orion's belt. And Matariki is what we call the Pleiades. Okay? And they lived in the Te Rangi Kapu Kapuatea. And a time came where the wife, Matariki, she left her husband Takeru. And Takeru went to all the animals and he asked each of the animals, will you come with me in my journey to go get my wife? And none of the animals agreed. And last of all, he went to the Honu, the turtle, the sea turtle. And he asked the Honu if the Honu would come. And the Honu said, yeah, I'll come with you. And then Takeru, what he did is he blessed the Honu, the turtle. He said, you're going to be sacred. People will not eat you except as part of religious ceremonies on the marais, on the worship grounds. And so that became a custom. So when they caught a turtle that have a religious ceremony, and as part of that religious ceremony, when the head of the turtle was cooked, it was given to the firstborn son for that marae on that island. And that was the custom. And if you notice, if you look at the stars, Matariki, Pleiades comes up a couple of hours before Takeru, the Orion's belt. And actually, Orion's belt is pointing to Matariki. So it's like he's following her across the sky. He's trying to go get her. And so that's the end of the first story. This is the main story. In about the late 1500s, on the island of Hao, there was a husband and wife. The husband's name was Kana Parua. His wife's name was Ruditau, and they had two sons. The oldest was Tangaroa Tiroora, or Tangaroa for short, and the youngest was Moeava Tukirima, Moeava for short. And the older brother, Tangaroa, he went to the island of Takaroa, and he married a woman there named Korare. And she gave birth to 5 children. The first 4 were boys. Tangihia, Rongotama, Pari Pari, Reipu. And then the last was a girl named Tapuhoatua. And when these children were born, after they were born, the parents died. And so these 5 children were adopted by their father's younger brother, Moeava. And Moeava came to Takaro and he lived there. And Moeava was a great warrior, and he was also a wayfinder. He would sail around in canoes, and he was a navigator. He would sail around the Tuamotus in canoes from island to island. And what he did is, there's this one district, there's this one mara, this worship ground in Takaro called Rangifawa. And the district around it is called Matiti Murumuru. And Moeava, he made a canoe in that district. And the name of Moeava's canoe was Murihenua. And he would sail around to these different places. And one time he went to the island of Napuka. And there was this beautiful young woman there. And he was like, wanted to marry her. Her name was Huare. And he made arrangements that he would, they got engaged. Okay, they didn't sail around and, he went from island to island and stuff like that. But he was engaged. She was his fiancée. And one time Moeava was sailing in the sea, and he ran into the canoe of this other, he ran into this other guy who was sailing his canoe. And the guy's name was Patira. And he was a warrior from the island of Makemo. And they met in the sea, and they're talking, and they're kind of like, yeah, I'm Moeava. And then they're, when they would meet, they would say stuff like, it's called a whakatene, talking about how brave they are. Like, I am a warrior who stands on the path of the winds. And, I am a chief from Hawaii, the spirit land. And they were talking, and it came out that Patita told Moeava that he was going to go to Napuka to meet the flower of Napuka. And Moeava recognized the flower of Napuka. But that's Huare, that's his fiancée. And this guy, Patita, had a romantic interest in Moeava's fiancée. And Moeava was like, no, you can't do that. That's my fiancée. And Patita kind of brushed him off. And what happened is they went off their separate ways or whatever. And there was this time where in Moeava, he returned to Napuka. And he married Huare. And sometime after that, he was sailing away, sailing, and Patita came, that other warrior from Makemo. He came to Napuka, and he was talking with Huare, and he had this romantic interest in her, and she could tell that he had a romantic interest in her, and that she was married. And she said, haven't you heard about the great warrior Moeava? And Patita goes, I don't think so. He had. And Patita, he kidnapped Huare, took her away. And when Moeava found out his wife had been kidnapped, he made an arrangement with Patita that they would meet on the island of Makemo to fight. And Moeava went to Makemo to wait for the arrival of Patita. And Patita was a giant. He would step from island to island. And Moeava could see way off in the distance, walking among the clouds, Patita, stepping from island to island, coming to Makemo. And Moeava, he took a rock. And I think actually, as I understand, it's like a rock about this big. And he put it on his sling, and he slung it at Patita, and hit Patita in the head, and killed Patita. And then Moeava, he took his wife back, and then went back to Napuka. And so then they continued to live in Napuka, and his wife got pregnant, and she gave birth to a boy named Kehauri. And Kehauri, he's in the sequel of the story, okay? She gave birth to a boy named Kehauri, and he was the firstborn son for Moeava on Napuka. And sometime after this, what they did is these two parents, Moeava Huare, they took their son Kehauri to live in Napuka, to live on Takaroa, so that Moeava was close to his nephews and his niece on Takaroa. And this is the thing. Those nephews of Moeava, this is the problem. They were from Takaroa. Their cousin Kehauri was from Napuka. And in their view, Napuka is kind of like an island of not an island of no consequence. It's a small island. It's out of the way. They looked down on Kehauri because he was from that island of Napuka. And Kehauri could tell that his cousins looked down on him. So this was like a problem. This was a family problem. And one time, they caught a turtle in Takaroa. And according to the custom, they took it to the marae of Rangiwhaua and they cooked the turtle. And after it was cooked, they pulled it out of the oven and then they split it up. And the head of the turtle, this is the marae on Takaroa, it was by rights belonged to Tangihia, the firstborn nephew of Moeava. But Kehauri, he was the firstborn son of Moeava. Tangihia was the firstborn son for the marae at Takaroa. Kehauri was the firstborn son for the marae at Napuka. And it was his custom to eat the head of the turtle. And it's like, but this isn't Napuka, this is Takaroa. And his nephews, his cousins told him, look, you want to eat the head of the turtle, you can go back to Napuka and then you can have it all you want, but not here in Takaroa. And the mother of Kehauri Huare, she told him, Ito kaingara na koe turo te haunu. Iko nera na totua kano Tangihia turo te haunu. In your homeland, the head of the turtle is yours. But here, the head of the turtle belongs to your cousin, Tangihia. So Kehauri kind of backed off. And he didn't insist on that anymore. But he knew, he could tell his cousins looked down on him. And that bothered him a great deal. And he went home and he told his parents he wanted to go back to Napuka. And at one time he said, Takunanune ki tipora ki Hawaii. My shame is in the night world in Hawaii. And it kind of convinced his parents. So they moved back to Napuka, Moeava, Huare, and Kehauri. And this is the problem. You know, Huare, Moeava had killed a bunch of different, he was a warrior and he'd win. And so that means he'd killed a bunch of people. And there were a lot of people who were upset with Moeava. Like he killed that warrior from Makemo, Patira. People from Makemo are mad at Moeava. But they're not going to mess with him because he's a really tough warrior. And then Huare, she had two brothers on Napuka, the uncles of Kehauri, and they were not pleased that Kehauri's cousins in Takaroa had treated him, had been disrespectful to him. They were upset. And so Moeava shows up with his family in Napuka, and those two brothers are going, oh, if he's here in Napuka, that means he's not in Takaroa. And maybe people could go to Takaroa and fight his nephews and kill them and take revenge for all the stuff that Moeava's done to them. So they sent a message to, these two brothers sent a message to Makemo. And the guy, as best as I know, his name is Muta. And what he did was, he was like the warrior, the head warrior from Makemo. And they told him, well, Moeava's here in Napuka. That means he's not in Takaroa. So Muta goes, okay, yeah, we can go to war. And he sent out the word to different groups in the Tuamotu Islands that let's go to Takaroa and fight the nephews of Moeava. And so there was a bunch of, it was called a Tini Tangata. It's a battalion of men. It's like a war group. Probably, like a canoe load of men who've come to fight. And there were about 13, 14, 15 teenies, battalions of men that came to Takaroa to fight the nephews of Moeava. The Titinio Muta, Titinio Kaua, Titinio Tuero Kura, and this goes on and on and on. And the last Tini was Titinio Tautu. Okay, there's this guy named Tautu, and he came with his battalion. And they came, and he'll come back into the story later, okay? So they came to Takaroa, and they went to war against the nephews of Moeava. So Tangihia, Rongotama, Paripari, the three oldest nephews, they went to the battle. Reipu, the youngest nephew, maybe he was too young to fight. Him and his sister, they went and hid in this one tree. It was like a great big tree with big branches, lots of shade. And there was this vine growing up underneath the tree, so that if you stood underneath the tree and looked up, all you'd see is the leaves of the vine. So if somebody's hiding in that tree, you're not going to find him. So Reipu and his sister Tuamotu hid in the tree. But the three older brothers went to the battle. And they went to the battle and they were defeated and they were killed. And after the battle, the youngest brother, Reipu, he climbed down from the tree. He wanted to see what had happened to his oldest brothers. And he started walking towards the Marae, the worship ground of Rangiwhaua. And he was walking on this path called Te Ara Moi Moi, which actually means the hidden path. And he's walking along it, and he hears a tavake bird crying. And he keeps on walking. And then a little while later, he hears a kuriri bird crying. And when a kuriri bird cries, it's warning you of some danger, or it's telling you about, it's like it's warning you about something. So when he heard the kuriri bird cry, what he did is he got off the path and he went through the bush so that nobody would see him. And he got around the back of the Marae of Rangiwhaua, and he saw his three brothers lying there dead. And the enemies had killed them, and the enemies were kind of off in the distance, not too far away, celebrating that they had been victorious. But these three bodies were lying there. And he went up to those bodies and they were tied together. And as I understand what I've been told, what it says is that the Muta had tied them together. He was like the guy who was leading the whole thing. I think the reason they tied them together is that if you want to steal a body, like take him home and give it a proper... Because these enemies, their intention was to cook him and eat him. And if you want to steal one of the bodies and take it back and give it a proper burial, you have to untie it first. And it's going to take time and you might get caught, right? So they wanted to, the enemies, they didn't want those bodies to get stolen. But what Reipu did is he snuck up to his brother's bodies and he rubbed noses with each of them. And the Tuamotuan culture, that's called Te Karofa Hopenga, the last farewell, the last goodbye, the last love. Okay, and it's like when somebody's in a coffin and you're about to close up the coffin, you'll rub noses with them and say, "This is the Karofa Hopenga. This is the last show of love." And then you close up the box. And then after that, after he gave him Te Karofa Hopenga, he went back and hid in that tree with his sister. And what the enemies did, after they came back from celebrating, they dug a big hole in the ground, put in rocks, put in wood, and then they lit a fire with the intention they're going to cook these brothers and eat them. And I told you there was the last teenie, the last battalion was the teenie of Tautu. And this guy Tautu had come. He had come for the fight, but he did not intend to eat any of these nephews of Moeava. And his daughter had come with him. Her name was Arangahua. And she came to the marae when they're preparing the oven, and she looked at these bodies, and they're face down. And she saw the first body. It was tattooed with the tattooing of a warrior, of a shaman. And she goes, "Okay, that must be Tangihia. He's the shaman." The second body was tattooed with a tattoo design for a warrior. And she goes, "Okay, that must be Rongotama. He's the warrior." And the third one had a different tattooing, and she recognized it as Paripari. But she knew that there was a fourth brother. She said, "Okay, there's one brother remaining." But she didn't tell any of those guys there so that they wouldn't go look for him. She just kind of kept it to herself. And so what they did, the enemies, they cooked these nephews of Moeava and they ate them. And then after that, they all went back to wherever they came from, for fear that if Moeava comes back, he's going to kill them. But the thing about the fire, it was a magic fire. It was a mana fire. After they were eaten, the fire continued to burn. And after the battle, what Reipu had done. There were these two, I think, tavake birds. And he sent them on an errand to go to Napuka and tell Moeava that there was trouble back at Takaroa. I mean, the birds couldn't talk, but if they flew to Napuka, Moeava would see them and recognize, ooh, something's happened back at Takaroa. So it was like them sending a message to Moeava, like, you need to come. Well, that daughter, Rangahua, the daughter of the guy Tautu, the last teenie, she was walking around one day and she saw Reipu, the youngest brother, and he was hiding. And she recognized that must be the youngest brother, Reipu. And she kind of like talked to him and got his trust, and they fell in love, and he slept with her, and she got pregnant. And what happened when she got pregnant, he told her, Moeava is going to come. When he comes, he's going to kill you and your father. You guys need to go back to where you came from. And he asked her, told her, if she gave birth to a boy, to name him Te Manukuta Takitake, the red Takitake bird. And so she went with her father, and they went back to their home island, which is Te Nonoka, which is an island near Hikueru. And those tavake birds, they flew to Napuka. And Moeava, when he saw them, he recognized there was trouble back at Takaroa, and he needed to go to Takaroa. So he took his wife, and he took his son, and some other men, and they set off in their canoe. And on the way, they stopped at Makemo. And they stayed there for several days. And one day, some of the men from Napuka who were Moeava, they were like swimming in the sea with some of the young warriors from Makemo. And those young warriors were talking about how they'd, killed and eaten Tangihia, Rongotama, and Paripari. And those warriors overheard that. Tokoi Tuakana, Tangihia. Okay, I think maybe they told it to Kehauri. Tokoi Tuakani Tunuhia Kaihia Mato. Your cousin was cooked and eaten by us. And Kehauri heard about that. And he went home. And he was wailing in his, like on his bed. And his parents were going, what's going on? And he said, this is what's happened. This is what I heard those guys say. And then the story goes, is like next day Moeava went, when those young warriors were out there swimming or whatever, those warriors from Makemo were out there swimming. He went there and he listened to them talk. And they said, they were talking about killing and eating Tangihia, his nephews. He was really mad, and what he did is he took a harpoon and he strung the harpoon through their pectoral muscles, like made a rope of bodies. Didn't kill him. And then he towed him behind his canoe. And he went with his son Kehauri and I guess his men or whatever, and they went to Takaroa, pulling this necklace of bodies. And some of them drowned and some of them didn't. And they got to Takaroa, and he cooked them on the oven. Because I said that oven was still burning. He cooked them on that oven and ate them. And what he did is, he knew his nephews were dead. He went around to the different islands of the people who killed his nephews, and he fought with them and took revenge for the death of his nephews. Killed them, I guess. And what he did was, I think he took Muta, the guy who'd been in charge of the whole thing, and he took him back to that fire on Takaroa, and he cooked him there and ate him. But the fire was still burning, and what Moeava did is he rolled in the fire, and he said, Katinai, Katinai, Katinai te ahio Tangihia. Put it out, put it out, put it out. Put out the fire of Tangihia. And then he said the same for Rongotama and for Paripari, for each of his three nephews. And then finally the fire went out. Okay, and then Moeava and his son Kehauri, they went back to Napuka. And that's the end of the main story. When they got back to Napuka, then Moeava his sickness got really big. He got really sick. As best as I can tell, he had a spear wound. And with the spears, you get speared, the spear point goes in you and it breaks off in you. And unless you can cut it out, it'll fester, get infected, and you're going to die a slow death. And that's what was happening with Moeava. He got really sick because he had a spear wound. And what he did is he took his son, him and his son Kihauti, they went down to this island called Hikueru, looking for this guy named Tuamotu, who was, I think, he was like the chief of Hikueru. I think that they were looking for medical care for Moeava. They got down to Hikueru and they looked and they couldn't find anybody down there. It's like they were all gone or something. And then Moeava got really sick. And he was telling his son, Kihauti, when I die, don't throw away my spear, Puanea. It'll be a strength for you. And after I die, go back to Napuka, and then you'll be exalted. I don't know what that means, be exalted, okay? And so after this, Moeava, he died. And Kihauti, all by himself, he buried his father, took the spear, went back with the canoe of his father, Murihenua, went back to Napuka. And he gets back to Napuka, and the people were going, where's the great warrior, Moeava? And he said, he died. I buried him in Hikueru. And then they had what's called Te Tuamotu, which is the mourning, like the days of mourning. And after the days of the Tuamotu, of the mourning, were over, Kihauti started preparing this canoe because he had the idea he was going to go to this place called Marangaiko Keka, which is the part of the ocean around the island of Reao. So he's preparing his canoe. And the people of Napuka go, where are you going to go? He says, I'm going to go to Marangaiko Keka. They said, no, you can't go. You're the warrior for the island. If enemies come, and you're gone, there'll be nobody to fight them. And Kihauti, he looks at them and he says, "Pah!" And he's like, what I think was going on in his mind is he was the one smart guy in this story. He realized this revenge stuff, this war stuff had killed everybody, almost everybody in his family, his cousins, his father, all the other guys had gotten killed because of this culture of revenge, of war. And he was sick of it. And it's like, he didn't want this anymore. That's what I'm thinking, okay? Can't read his mind though, because it was a long time ago. And so they just didn't talk to him anymore after this. And he finished his preparations and he went to the island of Reao. And when he got there, the warriors of Reao saw, this is Kihauti. They didn't bother him because he had this reputation as being a very fearsome warrior. And Kihauti stayed in Reao, married a woman from Reao, settled down, had a house, built out, lived with his wife. And she got pregnant 4 times. He had 4 sons by her. Tukiaroa, Tukiapoto, Maharu, and Maihea. 4 sons. And he's living peacefully. And this is the problem. Because the warriors of Reao, they would go and they would do this thing called Hahanupuai. It was war drills. They'd take their spear or take the club, and they'd be doing martial arts fighting with their spears or with their club or whatever. And the point was, it was practice. If enemies came, then they could do the same thing with their enemies and defeat their enemies rather than just being like, okay, they'd be prepared for war. And they would do these hahanupuai, like almost a contest, competition. And every time they would do it with Kihauti, Kihauti would always win. And it bothered them a great deal. What if he decides to start killing us? What can we do? He's way better than us. And they had a meeting one time and they talked about it. What do we do about Kihauti? And in their meeting, they came up to a decision of what they were going to do. And one night, Kihauti's sitting at home with his wife and his 4 sons. And they're all little. The sons were all really little. And he just thinks everything's peaceful, like happy, peaceful living. And the warriors of Reao came to his house with their weapons. And the wife of Moeava, of Kehauti, she saw them coming. She understood what their intention was, to kill Kehauti. And she yelled at them, "Kauraka kotoi patukia Kehauti! Kauraka kotoi patukia Kehauti! Don't kill Kehauti! Don't kill Kehauti!" And Kehauti looked at them and he knew that he couldn't do anything about it. And so he grabbed each of his sons and he rubbed noses with each of his sons. Te karofa hopenga, the last farewell. And then he gave Te karofa hopenga to his wife. And then he ran. And he's running, and it wasn't good enough. The warriors of Reao, they killed Kehauti. And when Kehauti was killed, his sons were all little. They did not remember what had happened. Okay? And sometimes when they'd catch a turtle, they'd bring the turtle fat to the wife, to the widow of Kehauti. And on the days when it was windy, they couldn't go fishing because these guys lived off of the sea. Their food was fish. On the days when they were fishing, it was too windy. And she'd start crying just randomly and say, "This is a warning for the death of Kehauti." And, and her sons would look at her like, "What's going on with our mother?" And you understand, she's been traumatized. Her husband was murdered in front of her eyes. She has 4 sons, 4 mouths to feed. And she's like a widow. I think the turtle fat that would bring to her, I think that was an act of charity, but maybe it wasn't enough. Like maybe their guys were kind of left on their own. It's just a great burden for this widow, this poor woman. And one time, the boys, they got a few years older, and they got in their canoe and they went out fishing for turtles. And they caught some turtles, and they're bringing them back to shore. And when they got back to shore, the warriors of Reao are standing on the shore. And they took those boys' turtles. And so they went home empty-handed, stealing from orphans. And what these boys would do, they would go out into the bush away from people, and they would hahanu puwai. They would do the war drills with spears and clubs and stuff. And they would do the hahanu puwai. And some time went by, and they were older. And their mother, one time they went fishing for turtles again. They caught their turtles, and they're coming back to shore in their canoe. And the warriors of Reao are waiting on the shore. And they took those boys' turtles. And they went home, and their mother said, "Where are your turtles?" And they said, "The warriors of Reao took them." And their mother said to them, "Don't say anything to them so you don't end up like your father." And they asked their mother, "Who killed our father?" And she said, "Natokone Patu. The people of this place killed him." And those boys, they'd go off into the bush and they would hahanu puwai. And the youngest one, Maihea, he was the best. Maybe because he always had to fight people. His 3 older brothers were all better than him. And so I don't know, he was the best among all those 4. And these boys got older. And finally they decided, this is the time to rangi te taowa, to raise a war party. Do the war for revenge. And so what they did is they went out and got in their canoe and they went out fishing for turtles again. And they caught their turtles and they're coming ashore, and the warriors of Reao are going, "Hey, we're going to steal some turtles." And as the canoe's coming to shore, the youngest brother, Maihea, he stood up in the bow of the canoe and he recited this poem called, it's the Whakatene of Kehauti. A whakatene was this, it's like people would compose these poems about themselves. In particular, warriors would recite a whakatene about themselves at the beginning of the battle to describe themselves, to describe their power of a warrior to the enemies. Like, I'm a great big waves crashing on the beach. Or, I'm a warrior who stands in the path of Hawaii or something like that. And the young Moeava, he recited the whakatene, the whakatene of his father, Kihauti. And when the canoe came on shore, the warriors of Reao, they tried to take the turtles. But the boys, the young men, they had their weapons and they fought the warriors. And they killed all the warriors except for one. And the remaining warrior, he fled. And he took a canoe and he was sailing to an island called Vaidatea. And those 4 brothers, they got in the canoe of Murihenua. That canoe had been made by their grandfather, Moeava. And they were following him in the sea, trying to catch up to him. And he got Kivaina Tohua, smack halfway in between Reao and Vaidatea. And he looked back and he could see there was this canoe way off in the distance following him in the sea. He didn't know who it was, but he kept on going. And a little while later, he looked and that canoe was closer and he recognized that as the 4 sons of Kihauti chasing him. And what he did is he took the spear of Kihauti. I think that would be Moeava's spear, Puanea. And he waved that spear at those sons of Kihauti, probably trying to tell them, like, I killed your father. You're not going to be able to kill me. And the sons, they had the spear of the main warrior of Reao. And they picked up that spear and they waved it back, basically to say him, all the warriors of Reao are killed. You alone remain. You're going to get killed too. And when that warrior saw that spear, he fell down and he said, Ereao Kamore. And he died. And then those sons of Kihauti, they brought their canoe up next to that canoe and they jumped on the canoe and they killed everybody on the canoe. And then their war for revenge was over. We come to the end of our story, and this is the time we talk about the wisdom and the morals that we can gain from this story. We owe it to the people in the story because of their suffering. So in the times of Moeava, they were having these revenge feuds. And what I want to say to them is, if somebody hurts you, don't go after the individual. Change the system, because they're acting within the system. Change the system. That's your revenge. The second thing I get from this is, in the story of Kihauti, the sons of Kihauti, they would be going off into the woods, and they would be doing these military drills. And you could tell that the bad guys were going to get it. Okay? And some people were happy with that. And I'm going to say, don't be happy. And the reason is this, is the sons of Kihauti were chasing the last warrior of Reao, and he's in his canoe. And he fell down dead in the canoe. And then the story ends with something. It says that the sons of Kihauti, they jumped on the canoe and they killed everybody in the canoe. So who were those people on the canoe? Were they the warriors of Reao? No, the warriors of Reao were dead back in Reao. So who were those people then? They were the wives, the children, and the aged parents of the warriors of Reao. There'd been a battle in their land. Their protectors had been killed, and they're fleeing for safety to another island. And the sons of Kihauti catch up with them, and then they massacre them in their canoe. And so all these revenge feuds and the story about Kihauti, it ends with a bunch of dead bodies of women, children, grandparents. The blood is flowing. These bodies are lying in the canoe. All is silent. And so that's a massacre. Don't be happy about this. This guy, Kihauti, I admire him. He seems to have been the one person in this story who recognized that their culture of war and revenge was a bad idea. And so he went to Reao, and he just wanted to live peacefully, but he got killed. And because of this realization he came through, I say that he was a great man, and I admire him. And then last of all, there's 3 things that God wants us to do. He wants us to be a friend to the stranger, a support to the widow, and a parent to the orphan. And in this story of Kehati, you've got all 3 elements. Kehati shows up in Reao, he's a stranger, he gets killed. His wife becomes a widow. And then his orphan sons are growing up without a father. And their mother, she weeps at just random times because of the trauma that she's been gone through. And they don't understand what's going on. And I wish we could go back in time somehow and fix this stuff, this mess that they've made that's in this story. But we can't. Those were their times, and we are living in our times. But what I do, because I remember the story, is I look around my neighborhood, my town. Who are the strangers? Who are the widows? I try to take care of these people. I try to be kind to them. And so, when I started this story, I talked about having this dream where I went to Takaro in my dream, and I called out the names of these people in the story, and they've been dead for 400 years. They did not answer me, and I wept. When I reach out to the stranger or to the widow in a spiritual way, I am calling to these people in the story, and I'm saying, it's been 400 years. You are not forgotten. I still remember you. These are the words of the ancient people that have passed down to us all the way into these days. These words are done.